Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing White Teeth by Zadie Smith, one of the books you've been recommending the most since I started the channel. I always hear her Smith discuss together with authors like Jonathan Franzen, David Foster Wallace, DeLillo, Michael Chabon, some of my very favorite writers, and I was kinda sure I would love this debut novel, Smith's debut novel. Did I? Before I begin the review, I should mention that this video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is a website offering video classes and online courses on all sorts of topics, from creative to practical, business classes, writing classes, arts classes. I highly recommend you check Skillshare out. I'll talk about it more at the end of the video. What you should know is that there's a link in the description box which gives you, well, it gives the first 500 people to click on it 2 months free subscription to Skillshare. Even beyond the 2 months subscription to Skillshare is pretty convenient, pretty cheap, so check it out. White Teeth. In a seminal essay from the early 2000s, James Wood, who is one of the world's most famous and revered literary critics, go figure why, coined the term hysterical realism, and I'll put a link to that essay in the description box. It's a great read, it's a must-read for anyone interested in contemporary fiction. In that essay, Wood argues the difference between the elegance of the traditional realist novel and the almost anti-realist tendencies in works by authors such as Zadie Smith, Jonathan Franzen, David Foster Wallace, Pynchon, and others. I don't especially love the term hysterical realism. I feel like it's a charged term however you look at it, but White Teeth definitely exhibits an exuberance that might at times almost appear borderline schizophrenic. The exuberance I am talking about is especially relevant, especially noticeable when it comes to its language. This is a novel that, with its lexicon, with its syntax, with its way of phrasings, with its linguistic jokes, with all of the effervescence of its presentations of this huge, this vast historical picture, this family saga that involves the life of 3 different families in the second half of the 20th century, but moving as far back as the 19th century, moving all the way almost to the 21st century. All across the novel, this exuberance is invigorating, it's refreshing, it's stimulating. At times, it is even almost tiring. In White Teeth, I felt like Smith was trying to cram a joke or an original turn of phrase or some linguistic magic in pretty much every sentence. There isn't really a boring sentence in this novel at all, although this accumulation at times does feel like overkill. Strongly connected to this exuberance in form is the novel's ambitiousness in its scope. Ambitious, I think, is the key word when we're talking about White Teeth. I was discussing this with a friend recently, and he said, and I totally agree, that White Teeth, being a debut novel, being Smith's debut novel, has that kind of ambition you sometimes find in the works of writers who were able to finally put their dreams into the form of a novel, their artistic dreams, their artistic ambitions into a finished form. And for that reason, because this is your debut novel, because this is your entry into the great historical discussion of literature, you sometimes try to cram all of the topics that interest you, all of the ideas that you have going on through your mind into a single work of fiction. There is this idea that debut novels very often are different from other novels because your first novel is not really something that you've been writing for 2, 3, 10 years. In a way, you've been writing it since you were born, if you see what I mean. All of your life leading up to that point went into this first work of fiction. That is, of course, kind of a critical construct, this whole idea. Debut novels are a very blurry concept. Jonathan Lethem has written a very insightful, beautiful essay on the whole myth of the debut novel. I'll put a link to that one too in the description box. But I do feel like sometimes this myth holds, and for all that I know nothing about Smith's biography, about her situation in life when she wrote White Teeth, I get the impression, I'll leave it at that, I get the impression that she did try to cram as many things as possible, as many ideas, as many discussion points as possible into a single novel, into a single work of art. The dynamics and legacy of British imperialism, the consequences of World War II on the later 20th century, the way science in the contemporary world has become a sort of unquestionable religion that causes fundamentalism in traditional religions, are all discussion points, are all topics, themes that orbit around the central core of the novel, which is the story of these two families, an immigrant family and a mixed ethnic family living in London. And the point is that this central core already offers plenty of material for a beautiful and insightful novel. The story of these two families is unforgettable, and it's peopled by some of the most interesting and wonderful and bizarre characters I've encountered in recent fiction. And all of those all of those topics orbiting around the novel make it gain more and more momentum as you progress through the narratives. Sometimes you get the impression that not all of these topics are given the attention they deserve, because how can you possibly do justice to all of that? How can you possibly do justice to history in a 600-page novel that is also trying to do a lot of other things? Because it touches upon the life of so many different characters from all walks of life, White Teeth does offer beautiful insight into the minds of different people, into, say, the reason why different people might become religious extremists and fundamentalists. Or it offers wonderful insight into the way certain scientists might be genius at their job and might know all about the way certain chemical substances work and the consequences they may have on living organisms, and they might be experts in their field while still having little to no emotional intelligence and be completely unable to understand the basic way human beings work. One of the features of hysterical realism, or at least of these novels by these people, is that sometimes realism itself is questioned in them. Sometimes it's on the verge of collapsing. In novels by people like David Foster Wallace or Michael Chabon, while they generally speaking belong to the realist tradition, you do encounter moments or characters or situations that shake the boundaries of this genre and question our assumptions about realism. To put it in simple terms, you can think of some of Infinite Jest characters. There's a levitating character in Infinite Jest. I believe there are feral babies or giant babies roaming this futuristic dystopic America. In Michael Chabon, in, say, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, ghosts play a pretty major part in the book. And in all of these situations, in all of these instances, in these two novels I've mentioned, it's not quite clear whether we are actually witnessing a breaking down of realism, either through the intervention of supernatural events, or what we are facing is a quirk of language, whether, say, the ghosts are supposed to be metaphor or visions. They can be explained with a completely natural explanation and solution. The same thing happens in White Teeth, for sure. You have this character who emigrates to the UK and falls prey to a sickness that forces him to stare at television all day long. And it's not quite clear whether that is some literal kind of curse, or whether it's more of a metaphor, a metaphor for someone just giving up on their dreams of bringing over their families from the New World to a wealthier life in Europe and just surrendering to the immediate pleasures of the Western world of the UK. That, I must confess, that blurring of realism stems 100% entirely from postmodernism and postmodernist fiction's questioning of ontological barriers, the barriers between different worlds, the barriers between the supernatural and the logical, between what makes sense through language and the nonsense that language can originate. It comes completely from the fiction of writers like Thomas Pynchon, works like Gravity's Rainbow, or Donald Barthelme. Pynchon's Against the Day, I would argue, is probably the triumph of that form of blurred realism. Very often in that novel, you're presented with sentences, with characters disappearing in thin air, and you're never quite sure whether that should be read literally or as a metaphor, because of the novel's blurring of so many different genres. So many of the events you read are questionable. Are the characters, the novel's protagonists, the chums of chance, actual characters? Do they belong to the realm of fiction within the novel? Are they meta-diegetic characters from adventure stories? I don't want to talk about Against the Day. I kind of do, because it's probably my favorite novel. Let's just say that White Teeth also offers beautiful insights of this same type of blurred realism, and its language, its sentences very often leave beautiful areas of shadow that just stimulate your thinking and just offer themselves up to many and often contradictory interpretations. As I've said already, ambition is probably the key word in White Teeth. I recently read Jennifer Egan's The Invisible Circus, which is probably the anti-White Teeth. This is another debut novel by an author who is... Jennifer Egan is one of my very favorite authors. I put her up with Michael Chabon, Jonathan Lethem in the pantheon of my personal literary heroes. I think Invisible Circus is a very good novel, make no mistake, I enjoyed it very much, but it is the exact opposite. It's a very elegant, very straightforward novel that at times appears even too cautious. It does offer a few instances of attempts to try and draw larger connection between the historical setting of the novel and the individual life of the characters, but keeps them very self-contained, keeps them to a few paragraphs, and doesn't try to overextend its reach and to do too many things at the same time. White Teeth does. It does all the time. White Teeth is constantly trying to bring in new content and to draw larger connections and to just explode and explode more in its scope. That's also pretty clear from the plot, which is very ambitious. It's structured around a connection between two characters that meet during World War II and meet again at the end of the century. And it seems almost like the entire plot is a way to get to a final flashback and a final twist, which is one of the greatest twists I've read in recent years. I'm not going to spoil it, and leads to, well, basically the best punchline I've ever read, the best joke punchline I've ever encountered. I do believe that when that final twist finally happens, it is almost disappointing, because all across the novel you could see the narrative moving toward it, and you could very well guess that that twist would eventually come. But I feel like, as is often the case with these kinds of things, guessing the twist yourself is much more entertaining than actually being handed the facts by the narrative. Still, it is a powerful twist. I loved reading about it. And then the novel collapses. Then the novel simply ends. A couple of pages after the twist, it just stops with a bang, undoubtedly, with a very powerful ending, but one that kind of leaves things as they are. This is a thing White Teeth has in common with the fiction, once more, of David Foster Wallace, and Smith has been very vocal in talking about her admiration for David Foster Wallace, how he was a model, his fiction was a model for what she wanted to write. And as in Foster Wallace's fiction, things just stop at a certain point. That's also all of these three writers I'm talking about now handle this very differently, but that's also something that happens in Thomas Pynchon. It's very rare in Pynchon that events are neatly tied up and with a final conclusion. Crying of Lot 49 is the classic example of a narrative that just stops without a conclusion, although it kind of does, because it goes back to the beginning and ties everything into a perfect circle. However, White Teeth also simply stops. And if I have to be honest, it couldn't have ended any different way, because the novel was exploding so much, it was building up so much tension and bringing in so many different topics. Oh, it's also about animal rights. At one point it also brings in animal rights and animal rights activism. Gee, it was just inevitable that it couldn't do justice to all the characters. If anything, it's kind of disappointing that with a very brief paragraph at the end, it tries to do justice to the story of some of them and gives you some flash forward about what happens to some of these characters later into their lives. It just had to stop. It couldn't possibly bring all of these lives to a satisfactory conclusion. All throughout this review, it sounded, I realized, as if I was complaining about White Teeth, about the language that is at times tiring, about the ambitiousness of it and of its historical discussions that cannot possibly fit into a novel of this size, into a novel period, unless you are trying to outdo Proust, about the way the ending inevitably collapses on itself. The narrative just grows and grows and grows and then collapses. Was I complaining about all this stuff because that's bad? No, absolutely not. All of these things, all of this exuberance is exactly what I love in literature. These ambitiousness, this scope, this tendency to reach beyond what is possibly reachable is what I love in art. And sometimes it makes for rather grandiose art, and White Teeth by all means is a grandiose novel. It's a maximalist novel if I've ever read one. It is very much in its theme, in its focusing on the story of these immigrant families. It is the maximalist sister to Monica Alice Brick Lane, which is a novel which shares several similarities in its core themes, and I would recommend it to fans of White Teeth. In all of this ambitiousness, White Teeth is, well, exactly the kind of art I love, and it's immensely commendable. I loved all of Zadie Smith's language acrobatics, even when they kind of didn't land very gracefully. I loved her constant jokes, I loved all of her characters, the way all of these are brought together, even though some of these characters are only given a few pages in such a long novel, inevitably. I loved White Teeth so very much, and I highly recommend it if you are also a fan of these type of maximalist novels, if you are prepared to be maybe disappointed by the way some of these characters are handled, by the way their story is left a bit up in the air. I feel like that disappointment is part and parcel of the experience of literature. Literature and novels kind of teach you that sometimes you can't get what you want, sometimes narratives don't have an ending, sometimes questions that are just left unanswered. It's not always ideal, and the novel does offer enough insight and enough positions, strong positions, to justify this openness. In one of my favorite passages from White Teeth, Zadie Smith says something to, well, the narrator, sorry, says something to along the lines of, does everybody deserve love? No. Everybody deserves clean water. Not everybody deserves love, which is a pretty strong statement to put in a novel. If you write a novel and put in at least a strong statement like that, in my book you've written a successful novel. Well, if it's also good on other fronts, I imagine. Overall, I feel like I'm just rambling now. I really loved White Teeth, and I cannot recommend it enough to other fans of maximalist novels and other fans of these writers. I'm talking about writers like Pynchon, certainly David Foster Wallace, Michael Chabon or Jonathan Lethem, so on and so forth. I really look forward to reading more of Zadie Smith's oeuvre, and by all means let me know what you thought about White Teeth and about her other novels in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to click on that link in the description box. First 500 people to click on it will get access to Skillshare, to 2 free months subscription to Skillshare. I've remarked upon this in the past. One of my favorite things about Skillshare is the way every class offers a group discussion section where you can share the results of your work. Say if you're taking a class about an artistic skill, about sharpening your skills in a certain area, say drawing maps, I've talked about this in the past. You can share your drawings, your illustrations, your work with the rest of the class, get their feedback, learn from the person giving the class, but learn from your fellow students too. And that creates a beautiful seminar vibe, that is really conducive to great learning. A class I enjoyed very much recently was a class about creating your first fanzine. It was given by Kate Bingham-Burt. Zines have always fascinated me. A few years back I read City on Fire by Garth Riskalberg, which first introduced me to this world of the independent zine made with few absolutely minimal lo-fi means, but still transmitting and representing all the passion people have for the music or the books or the art forms or the whatever that interests them and that ignites their passion. And I definitely look forward to, even just for kicks, even just for fun, making my first zine. Thank you as always for watching the review, guys. Bye, guys.